This is Nhat-Dang Do from Political Science, the Department of Political Science, and the talk is entitled Reliable Representatives, Achieving Representation for Racial Minorities.
We all know that America has problems with race. To name a few, Black Americans are dying from police violence, and Asian Americans are getting hurt by rising racism from the pandemic. And although racial minorities are working hard at vocalizing their demands for change, as we've seen in protests like the Black Lives Matter movement, they're often drowned out by the loud voices of elite interests. At every step of the policymaking process, racial minorities face significant obstacles, either from powerful opponents, like police unions in the case of police reform, or apathy and lack of political will among legislators. In fact, we can intuitively sense that our political system is inherently unequal. We can think of it as being dominated by a Goliath, wielding their power and money to shape policies towards their own ends at the cost to others. It's little wonder then that people of color like me feel so helpless in our political system. But what if I could tell you that there was a way to slay Goliath? In the face of insurmountable odds, racial minorities are finding ways of forming formal lobbying organizations that I call Racial Minority Interest Groups, or RMIGs for short. These organizations, like the NAACP, work primarily to advocate for the interests of their respective racial groups. RMIGs play this crucial role in translating the demands of their communities and channeling the energy from the protests on the streets into concrete laws and lobbies of legislators. They compete to convince or lobby legislators to enact policies that matter to their communities, like limiting instances where police can use deadly force. However, RMIGs are vastly underfunded, few in number, and represent communities that are poor and don't vote as much or participate in politics as much. So the key question for me is, given these constraints, how can these RMIGs compete in a system so stacked against them? Well, what I found in the course of my research is, like David going up against Goliath, RMIGs surprisingly strike down powerful interests to win policy victories more often than one would expect. In fact, my research looks at the weapons, these slings and stones that RMIGs use to slay Goliath. For one, I find that RMIGs are very good at creating large coalitions of diverse groups to threaten the re-election prospects of legislators and goad them into action. In fact, my research finds that legislators overwhelmingly respond to these tactics. As a Vietnamese American, I want to do my part to help mitigate some of these inequalities. I plan on using the findings of my research to create a handbook that racial minorities can use as they compete in the intense lobbying arena. And in doing so, I hope to make American democracy more equitable and accessible, especially for the most vulnerable among us. Thank you.